So what else? What is involved in the moral life? Well, of course, there are virtues. Virtues are great things to have. Uh, Virtue is defined as a habitual and firm disposition to do the good, or a habit that perfects the power of the soul and inclines one to do good. You will see the word habit used in both versions of the definition. So, like any habit, a virtue has to be practiced to become truly habitual. There are several kinds of virtues. There are the virtues that we call theological virtues, which means they come from God and direct us to God. They are sometimes called infused virtues because we can't develop them ourselves. They come to us from God. When we are baptized, God infuses these virtues into our souls. And this picture here shows the relationship between or among faith, hope, and love, or faith, hope, and charity, as it is more traditionally called. You have to have all three of them. You know, everything important comes in threes. They work together, they reinforce each other. And faith is sometimes considered the root. You know, faith is the beginning, the thing that begins to grow. And the stem is hope, and it blooms in charity. But just as you can't have the bloom of a flower without the root and the stem being strong, you can have charity if you don't have faith and hope. How do we define these virtues? Well, faith is both a gift of God and a human act by which the believer gives personal adherence to God, who invites his response, and who also freely assents to the whole truth that God has revealed. Sometimes you think of faith as a very kind of almost superficial intellectual act. Yeah, I believe that. But it's so much more than that. When you're talking about divine faith, faith in God, faith is a relationship. And like any relationship, it has to be nourished and it has to continually grow. So faith is it really is, not just in a sense, your relationship with God, your communication with God. It's your response to God who has invited you into this relationship. So it's so much deeper than just saying, oh yeah, I believe that. It has to affect your life in a very deep way. It results in hope. Hope is relying on the omnipotence, goodness, and fidelity of God. When we have hope in this sense, we are confident that with God's help, we will be able to reach our final goal, eternal happiness. And if we are persons of faith and hope, we should exhibit love or charity in our lives. Love defined as willing the good of another person. Doesn't have to be an emotion. It could be emotional. It's very nice when it's emotional. But we are often told we must love every other person. And this includes people we don't like, people that have done horrendous things, people that have hurt us. What we hope and pray for them, if we love them as God loves them, is that they will see the error of their ways, they will reform themselves, and ultimately they also will be in relationship with God. Doesn't mean you have to live with a person or associate with a person or have anything to do with them, but you must love them and, of course, ultimately love God. Up here at the top, you see the traditional symbols for faith, hope, and charity. The cross, the anchor, and of course, the heart. The other most general category of virtues are called moral virtues. These virtues are acquired and strengthened by our own efforts, helped, of course, by the grace of God. They are the fruit and the seed of morally good acts. The more morally good acts you perform, the stronger the associated virtue becomes, and then that becomes the seed of more and stronger and bigger morally good acts. They dispose all of our powers for communion with divine love, which we can't say often enough is our goal. There are 4 virtues that we call cardinal virtues, and these are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And these lead to the other virtues, and the other virtues can kind of be grouped within these 4. As Lowry also states, until the arduous work of cooperation with grace to develop natural virtues, charity has nothing on which to work. In other words, if you don't develop these virtuous habits, these good habits in your life, you're not going to be able to use the love, the charity that God has infused into your soul, because you're not in the habit of acting that way. So it's always a combination of God's grace and us accepting and cooperating and living that way, and these habits become stronger and stronger as we go along. Very brief definitions of the 4 cardinal virtues. Prudence is an extremely important virtue. It directly uses our conscience because it disposes our reason to discern what is truly good and to choose the right means for achieving it. It makes you sit back and think and say, okay, what is the best way to approach this situation, rather than just flying off without any consideration. This should apply to the general way you live your life and to any important decision that you make, either daily or longer term decisions. Justice is defined as the firm and constant will to give to others their due. And those others include, of course, God and your fellow human beings, and even non-living animals and even non-living creation. There is an appropriate relationship due to everything else that exists. And the virtue of justice helps us to live in correct relation with the rest of creation. Fortitude is probably the easiest one to understand what it is. Firmness in difficulties and constancy in the pursuit of the good. Of course, the ultimate expression of fortitude is martyrdom for the sake of your belief in God, which still goes on today. I mean, you hear about the martyrs in the early days of the church, but there have been martyrs in all times and in different places throughout the centuries. Temperance is also an important virtue. It doesn't mean you cannot enjoy all of the pleasures of life. God made us with a body, and He gave us lots of things to enjoy with our bodies. Anything that feels good, tastes good, makes us relaxed is a good thing. But as we well know, good things can be used to an excess, and they become addictions, and they become bad habits. They actually make us less and less happy. So the virtue of temperance makes our will control our instincts and provides the proper balance in the use of these created goods. Everything that God gave us that is a good thing, from sexual attraction and activity to eating good foods to drinking wine, we're supposed to enjoy all of those things, but in the proper amounts, at the proper place and time. And we actually will feel a lot better if we use them that way. Not to mention be more virtuous. Then, of course, on the other side of the coin, we have vices. Vices are bad habits as opposed to virtues, which are good habits. They lead you away from God. Anything that leads you away from God leads you away from happiness. You might look at people that are living life using some of these vices that you know about, and you say, well, they look really happy to me. But you know what? They're probably not really happy uh, deep down within themselves, or they wouldn't keep pursuing more and stronger of these physical attractions. They darken your conscience. They can kind of shut off your conscience, turn off the light, don't pay attention to it. And the more you do them, the more you're inclined to choose evil. Even what we call venial sins, the lesser sins, if you make those a habit, they can be like your gateway drug. You can then say, well, I did that and here I am, I'm still okay. Now I can, do this bigger and better or worse thing. So you have to be careful of vices. They're sneaky. And they're the tools of the devil. Every virtue is the middle path. Every virtue has a vice that is on the one side or the other side. For example, hope, the theological virtue of hope, that God ultimately can be depended upon, can be trusted to help you to achieve your goal if you cooperate with Him. On the one side is the vice of despair. Oh, I have just screwed up so many times. I am such an ignorant person. I am such a bad person. Even God could not help me. That's despair. And that's not good, because obviously it's not true. There is no person beyond God's help if they ask for it, if they accept it. There's the other side of that coin, which is called presumption. God is so good and so merciful that he'll just pull me out in the end. It doesn't really matter what I do. There can't be a hell. God is too good. Well, remember, God is very good. He is goodness itself, but He is also justice itself. And He will allow you to experience the consequences of your choices. So, don't presume upon His goodness, because He is letting you choose. Same thing with prudence. Prudence is you figure out what should be done, you decide how to do it, and you do it. There's rashness at one end, where you don't even think about it. You don't bother to go through that cogitation, that decision making, that data gathering. You just act. And so rashness is a vice. On the other side, we have indecisiveness. You just take a look at all this data and all this stuff you need to consider, and you just can't make a decision. That's not good either. You do have to make a decision. You do have to come down on the side of something. With the virtue of courage, which is a moral virtue that we can develop and should. The lower vice there is cowardice. You're afraid to do anything. You're just the chicken, right? I can't act. I just don't know what I should do, And on the other end, we have foolhardiness. I can do whatever I want, what the heck. You only live once, and so on and so forth. That's not courage, that's idiocy. There isn't any soldier, any truly brave soldier in battle that hasn't truly considered all the possible consequences of what could happen to him, and is as still strong enough to go out there and do his job. The same thing applies to firemen, policemen, and so forth. They're not being foolhardy. They're not walking into these situations without appropriate preparation and protection. But that's the other end of courage. You don't want to go to either one of these side columns here. You want to stay right in the middle. Each virtue has two vices that oppose it. We're just going to quickly mention that just like there are 4 cardinal virtues, there are what we call the 7 deadly sins, which you probably have heard of, and these are very, very brief indications of their definitions. Pride is choosing yourself over others. Greed is seeking your security in things. Envy is obsessing, being unhappy over something good that somebody else has. Anger is the desire to hurt someone. Lust is looking at a person selfishly like a thing for your own benefit. Gluttony is seeking security or love in food, and sloth is laziness or workaholism. It's the inappropriate, it's work having an inappropriate position in your life. Either you totally avoid it or you don't do anything else. All of these vices are really distortions of something that is good. Sometimes people will say to me about pride, well, it's good to feel good about yourself. It's good to say, wow, look what I could do. And absolutely you should feel good about yourself. But not to the extent that you figure you're better than everybody else. It can be distorted. It can be inflated. You could say something similar about every one of these. Anger can be a good thing. There are things you should be angry about. The fact that children go to bed without eating, who go to bed hungry at night because their parents can't afford to feed them, or because they don't have any parents, you should be angry. But anger, Jesus was angry. You know, he drove the money changers out of the temple. But being angry enough to hurt another person, being angry enough to kill someone, that is an inflation, a distortion, an excess of the feeling of anger. And we could go through every single one of these similarly. So most vices can be categorized or considered to be derived from one of these 7 deadly sins. The last part of the chapter 23 in the United States Catechism for Adults is called Love, Rules, and Grace. It mentions the problem of individual autonomy versus community and tradition. And this means that in many cases, our society tends to overvalue the autonomy of the person, making each person a law unto his or herself, a law where they decide for themselves what is good and what is evil, and nobody else can tell me what to do. And there is an increasing suspicion of rules and norms from a tradition. If you say, oh, well, that's what the church teaches, that not only does it not convince certain people, but they become very defensive and angry about the fact that you would even say such things. Traditions are good. You don't want to follow anything blindly, but you also don't want to throw it out blindly. And you do want to consider yourself part of this tradition because you are. If you're a baptized Catholic, you certainly are. Moral life requires grace. Grace is a loving relationship with God. It's God sharing his life with us. And it's only grace that makes keeping the rules, the moral rules, possible. You need help. You can't do it on your own, especially when society is constantly telling you that you don't have to do it, that morality and religion are private things. And just, leave them home or leave them in church on Sunday. But they're not private things. They affect you and your relationship with everybody and everything else. And God will help you if you let him. There is a problem with the way love is interpreted. As a Christian, if you just read the rules and read them on the surface, you can lapse into a legalism and a moralism that just has you going around condemning people for what they're doing. And there really isn't any love involved in this. It's basically pride, saying that you're better than they are because you don't do these things. Love needs moral direction, as we have said. Love should not become simply sentimentality. Love should be a concrete and sometimes difficult decision to will the good of another person. Love, if it's ongoing and real, always requires sacrifice. Sacrificial love is necessary. Love isn't all peaches and cream and cloud nine and good feelings. It's really nice when that happens. But as anyone who's in a long-term loving relationship like a marriage knows, sacrifice is sometimes necessary to maintain that loving relationship. And the law, of course, we mentioned earlier. The old law was the first law that God revealed to mankind in the Ten Commandments. That was its summary. The truths that it expresses are naturally accessible to our reason if we don't shut it off. We can discover many of these truths, but God did us a favor and wrote them down and gave them to Moses. The old law did not have the strength and the grace of the Spirit, however, for its observance. The new law that was proclaimed and fulfilled by Jesus Christ when he taught his apostles does have this interior reality. It does have the grace of the Holy Spirit to assist us in its observance. It's primarily found in the Sermon on the Mount, if you want it in words. And it is the fullness and completion of the divine law, both natural and revealed law. The natural law that we could know on our own, and the revealed law that we could only know if God, in the person of Jesus, had told us about it. And it's, once again, the summary is love God and love one another as Christ loved us. Here's a good cartoon. You just take a second to read it here. That fence there is labeled God's commands, and the guy says, I hate being confined by this fence. I'm jumping over it. The other guy says, wait, it's not a fence. It's a guardrail. So be careful what you jump over because you don't know where you're going to end up. The commandments and other moral rules are given to us as ways of protecting the values that foster love of God and others. They provide us with ways to express love, sometimes by forbidding whatever contradicts love. That's really the whole point of teaching about morality. How do we stay in love and not do things that contradict love?